All right. My name is Nick Fandos. I'm a reporter for the Crimson. I'm going to introduce our last panel of the day, which is the reporter-editor relationship, the craft of storytelling. So we have Jennifer McDonald and Betsy O'Donovan, who combined, I'm told, have 30 years of editing experience. Jennifer is currently an editor at the New York Times Book Review, where she assigns fiction and nonfiction reviews. She, since 2008, has been on the staff of the Times Student Journalism Institute. She joined the Times in 2005 as an editor on the national desk. She's worked at the Washington Post, and is it CNET News? CNET? I don't know, CNET News in San Francisco, and she's a Nieman Fellow here this year. Betsy O'Donovan is a freelance writer and editor, I suppose co-based in Omaha and Durham, North Carolina. She became the first female editorial page editor of the Durham Herald Sun, and is a mentor editor for the Op-Ed Project, which is a nonprofit organization that tries to promote diversity of voices in public commentary. She's worked for other weekly newspapers, helped create the first Sports Center spinoff for ESPN. She is the Nieman Fellow Nieman Fellow in Community Journalism this year here at Harvard. So I'll let them take it away.
PowerPoint go. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around for us.
Yeah.
So a couple things. We'll pop up the agenda. Wanted to do some introductions. We won't make everybody go around the room like we did last night, but we did want to roll through the agenda and make sure we understood what you guys want out of this panel, because we can either go through what we've prepared very fast and move fast into Q&A, or we can kind of linger depending on what everybody needs. But we're hoping there will be a lot of hands up. If you have questions, stop us, all that jazz. And we're going to introduce ourselves, but introduce ourselves and then get we'll take the temperature of the room, as they say at the Harvard Business School.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, Nick did a great job introducing me, but I guess what I want to say is that as an editor over the course of my career, I currently work mostly with freelancers, novelists, journalists, academics who write book reviews for the Times Book Review section. But I have also worked closely with staff reporters at the national desk of the Times and the business desk of the Post, and I was the copy chief at news.com. So I've held lots of different editorial roles throughout my career. And there are different ways to cultivate editor-reporter relationships in each of those roles. So we can touch on some of that today, if you're interested.
And as Nick said, I'm the Community Journalism Fellow, so I've spent most of my career in newsrooms that have between 3 and 15 reporters. I started out as a reporter, so I moved to the copy desk after that, but my first instinct is almost always a reporter first instinct, and I tend to work at stories from that perspective. And that'll come into play later when we start talking about tools for editors and reporters. I think a lot about research. So to go back to the agenda, does this look like what you guys were expecting from this session? Yeah. Okay. All right. We've got Q&A planned in, so if there's just random stuff at the end of the day you want to talk about, we're thrilled. Okay. So.
You want to take it away?
Yeah. We thought we would start with an embarrassing true story from my life. Earlier this year, we had a great narrative nonfiction class with a woman named Paige Williams who teaches here. And she asked us at the end of the year, end of the semester, if we wanted to do a feature for Nieman Storyboard, which is all about narrative nonfiction. It's called Why Is This So Good? And you take a classic essay of nonfiction and you explain to people why it should be their favorite. Which sounds great until you pick your own personal favorite, and then you realize, like, oh my God, E.B. White is like rolling in his grave right now, and I'm not doing justice to the original essay, and I also look like an idiot. So that was the assignment, the problem. The remedy looked a little bit like this. Oh, wait, hang on, we have 2 slides. Hot chocolate was the original, but it involved more drinks than that. So this is my first draft. I wrote it in December, and I emailed it to Jen to get her take on it. And you will see there's, some pretty thoughtful commentary on here. We're not going to go through the whole essay. This is just page 1. But the commentary in green is, I think, a great example of what a good editor does. It came with just a note on the front of the email that said, like, I like this piece. I've marked some things to think about, which is where the conversation starts if you have an editor you trust. And then, that makes everything much more palatable. Also things like love this phrasing. But, she talks about just weaknesses through the piece. And then at the bottom, I should have put this on here too. At the bottom of the piece, she did what a good editor does, which is complete notes. Like, again, a helpful little thought about, what she liked. Quick recap, so, I know she's on my team. And then a really intense breakdown about organization, whether I'm really promoting the things I've talked about loving with the piece or if I've moved in a different direction.
Yeah, and so I want to back up a little and say, I know that Betsy, when she was writing this piece, I saw her agonizing. She's, she wants to do it really well, obviously, but she's pulling her hair out. She's like, it's not coming together. I have all these angles. I'm trying to go at it different ways. It's just, I don't know what to do. It's like, well, if you want someone to look at it, I'd be okay with that. And, knowing, though, that she's feeling pretty sensitive about it, I'm not going to take it in my editor role and be like, yeah, this sucks. This chick doesn't know how to write. Oh my God, I'm going to tear it up and fix it myself. That is exactly the wrong thing for an editor to do. What you really want is, I have the luxury of knowing that Betsy is a very fine writer. I'd been working with her for a few months. I'd seen her work in class, and I was like, this is a smart woman. I know that I can make a couple of suggestions. No. You can make a couple of suggestions, and she'll totally get it, and then she's going to take it back. I'm not going to try to rewrite it for her because, one, it wouldn't be her. 2, she's going to do it better than I would because she knows what she's really trying to say. She just needs a little nudging. So that is my approach to working with a piece like that, with a writer like this. It was a pleasure to read, and I'm just sort of typing as I go. I'm acting as fresh eyes, general reader. What are the questions that pop into my head as I'm reading this thing? And because I can't help myself because I'm a total nerd, I'm also finding little tiny line edits and noting those as I go too, and fixing quietly punctuation and things like that. So I turned it back to her, and to me, I had some thoughts on, well, here, I thought the lead was kind of buried. I thought, well, structurally, we need to move this that's down here up here just to ease the writer into the topic. But I also I like to say to writers, take these all as suggestions. This is what occurs to me, but maybe you see another way in. Again, with a writer that I trust who I know is going to do a good job, that's a useful approach.
And there was,
I just want to say, if there are any questions as we're going, if you want to raise your hand, don't be shy.
There were a couple things and this is a good example of why even when you've been editing people, as you guys have for the last, many of you guys have, you can kind of feel, even after you've been an editor, as a writer when you're floundering, but you can't always edit yourself well, and often you can't edit yourself well. So there were some assumptions that I made that if I had a reporter who had come to me with this stuff, I would have said, whoa, pal, this is, you're making some assumptions about what your audience knows, which is often actually a problem with reporters who are covering beats or reporters who are, doing criticism. They assume that the person who's reading has already encountered a lot of work, and they don't do a lot of backgrounding for them. So in this first draft, I gave a link to the original essay, but I don't recap it. I don't give people a sense of what White was trying to do, which is a basic thing whenever you're talking about a work of literature and you're assessing whether they succeeded. So, there was just a lot of missing material in this. So subsequently, I kept struggling with it, and we went to the next key stage, which was the having drinks together and talking about your work. So I had a hard copy, and we were actually, this wasn't a hard appointment. We were just sitting down one day doing our work, and I had 2 extremely different drafts of this piece. And one of them was a very formal approach that was, here in the world of literary criticism, we think about this, this, and this, and E.B. White is, of course, a genius, and we all love him. And the other one was like, I love E.B. White. I grew up with E.B. White. My first book with E.B. White was about a pig, and then he wrote this essay about a pig, and Jen, I'm talking to her about this, and I was like, I have these 2 drafts, but one of them feels like something a kid would write, and one of them is like the serious grown-up stuff. And Jen said, the other one's more fun. So the other important thing in an editor-writer relationship is to listen to your editor and trust them. So
It's more fun, and it sounded like Betsy. This was Betsy. I mean, the whole thing is, why is this so good? She's answering the question with the second one. Her enthusiasm's there on the page. Being, like, serious literary critic is not the mode that she's, should be writing in this sort of assignment. So, I mean, it's still a very serious and thoughtful and intelligent assessment of this piece. But there's a way to keep her voice in there without, drowning in seriousness.
So ultimately, the end result was this, which is I actually just went back to what she and I had talked about, which is the first time I encountered E.B. White. And it got people in, and it let me build up that backstory of what the piece is about. So it did, the approach did the job that the other draft was missing. And we had this, I desperately wish I had not lost this piece of paper, but I have a wonderful piece of paper from that, which is just the original piece with a markup that Jen did, and then it's all of these notes from our conversation that actually became, ideas that sparked the final draft and the version that's up on Nieman's storyboard now. So.
And my circling this paragraph and arrow and asterisk, this should go here, right? Yeah.
The conversation you have after you kind of have taken the temperature of the room. As Jen said, she knew I was really touchy about this. I respected the woman who had asked me to do it. It was being published alongside the work of writers I really love and respect. I was feeling pretty naked. I write criticism of public policy, not of literature. So then, once she'd taken the temperature and I felt like she was squarely in my corner and listening to me, she could do a much more kind of hands-on, bleeding red, full-on crit of the work, mark it up. But that comes second.
Plus, we had hot chocolate in front of us. So that would make her feel better, even if I was, tearing out her heart. Question?
I do, yeah. So I guess this would be relevant in editing this piece, but also presumably relevant in editing a book review where people aren't really reporting, but they're writing a lot, or they're reading, but they're doing a lot of opinion. How do you adjust to editing people's very specific personal voices and sort of not injecting yourself into their voice when you edit and not making that into your voice, but sort of being able to edit and also preserve their style?
Well, it's tricky because there's an art to that and sort of an ear to that. It comes with reading the writer and recognizing what is voice versus what is, say, style that clashes with time style, in my case. There's certain things that we can and can't do at the times when we're, in any kind of story. So if I have a writer who wants to swear all over the place, it's not going to happen, But there's a way to preserve the energy of their prose and have it be clearly their prose. It's difficult to articulate without a couple of concrete examples in front of me. But I'm just not going to edit something or completely rewrite something just because I think it sounds better this way and it's my way of doing it. This is sort of one of the basic best practices of being an editor is that you want to have a good reason, for making changes, whether it's a very small grammatical change or whether it's taking a clunky sentence and smoothing it out. You have to be able to justify to the writer why you're making the edit. And certain people, if you work with them more than once, you get used to what they're willing to take. At the book review, I work with the same writers less frequently, but working on, say, the national desk at the Times, where those writers too have their voices, although it's much more standard sort of Timesian newspaper style. Depending on who the reporter was, I could tell what they would be willing to take from me as the editor after I got to know them a little better. There are some reporters who, and this goes for really any publication, there are some reporters who are great reporters, right? And they just throw us out, but they're totally willing to admit they're maybe not the cleanest writers or the most concise writers, and it's great when they recognize that, and you can just say, okay, well, I'm gonna, fix this for you. I'm going to run all my questions by you. If I change your lead at all, I'm going to read the whole thing back to you. But I'm still not rewriting the whole thing top to bottom in my voice. I'm going with what I've got there. There's other writers who are very particular and who want to argue over every little semicolon. And so you get to learn, and they exist. So you learn who those people are, and you know what kind of conversation you're going to need to have with those people. I mean, there was one guy at the Times who, I loved. He was based in Washington. I loved it when I got on the phone because he actually knew the style manual better than I did, it seemed, And so we'd argue over, what kind of punctuation should be here, should this be capitalized or not? Oh, let me go look at that up again, and we totally geeked out on the story, So I hope that answers the question a little bit, yeah.
And sometimes this is part of why the power dynamic thing is really important. Like, it's really easy. I'm sure you guys have all been edited or have edited somebody who's put a lot of time into their stories. It's very easy for that to feel like a combative process. And when I'm embarrassed to say this, but when I was a new reporter, I was also a grammarian and an AP style book junkie, and I would get into these. I was not being what I thought at the time was well edited. I'd get into screaming fights with my editor in the newsroom, which is just, it was immature because I didn't really feel as though we had a collaborative relationship. But also, he would change my copy, and after a couple of times that he changed my copy without me hearing about it, and I saw the changes in print the next day, we were really just like straight on the highway to hell there, because there was no way I was going to trust somebody who didn't have the basic courtesy to talk to me about what he thought or wanted out of the copy. And we had a great seminar with Tracy Kidder's editor last weekend at BU, and he said this wonderful thing, which was, look, any changes that are made in the copy should be made by the writer. It's not always true on deadline,
right?
But if it's a significant change, it should go through the writer. And, it'll cost you a little time to hammer that out, but it is a respect thing.
Yeah, it's much trickier on deadline, which most of us are working under, right? So there are trade-offs. I mean, I would say the main thing is that when you're working quickly and you do, as the editor, need to change something or want to change something, one, if it has any kind of potential change in meaning, you have to run it by the reporter, because the reporter knows better than you usually. They've been doing the reporting. You need to check to see whether that sort of thing should be changed. Certain writerly things, you might just have to go with on deadline, I understand. But again, if it's like really basic stuff, it shouldn't be a problem. The other thing is another best practice. If you are changing things without really hashing it out, send the writer what we call the times of playback. Send the writer a copy of the story with enough time that they can read it up and down and make sure nothing's wrong. And especially for those of us publishing online, you have the luxury of going back and fixing little things, or big things for that matter. You don't want it to go online before, with factual errors, but if it does, obviously you can go on, fix it, do the correction. If there's little tiny things though, like, typo here, typo there, that can be scrubbed in a second go through, right? Before you, and updated for the site again. I mean, that's how we used to do it at news.com at my first job, because we moved super, super fast. And, I tried my damnedest, with my copy desk staff to be as clean as possible first go. But inevitably, and you see this on the Times and other places, when news is breaking, the stories are a mess the first time they go out. They can be. It drives me crazy. But, thankfully you can fix that stuff. I mean, it can be like, something as big as a whole paragraph duplicated somewhere. It's just because you're just expected to go so fast. So we have the luxury of time on the fellowship to sip hot chocolate and think of the most beautiful way to talk about this pig, But I get that you don't do that, every day in your newsrooms probably.
And on deadline, because I'm going to skip ahead to our, quick recap of what we've discussed, and then on to what we're actually talking about, which is this. So I'm working, most of the time when I'm working in my newsroom, I'm working with reporters on deadline, and it became apparent to me pretty early that the process is not transparent to them. Like, they think, a lot of reporters think, you get something in on deadline or 15 minutes after deadline, or you're fiddling with your perfect gem of a story, and you're going to make it perfect, so it's cool that it's an hour late, right? And they don't understand the downstream process. And So I find that taking time to explain, you give me the copy, it turns around like this. If you want to hear back from me before changes get locked in on the page, you have to, this is how our process looks. And I had one like massively sinful young reporter who was like, every night, can I have an hour? Can I have another 15 minutes on top of the hour? And when I finally said, like, look, you're never going to see your copy again if it falls into this black hole of time, she started getting her stuff in like 2 hours early because she wanted the editing process. And that's a good conversation to have with your reporters. This is what happens to your story next and after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of you are writers here, right? Reporters. It's much more fun, much nicer when you are involved in the editorial process, right? I hope that you are involved in the editorial process once you've handed it over. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah.
Brainstorming.
We thought we'd walk you guys through all of the process.
Yeah. Before we do, any questions about
or any
the back and forth?
Has any of you been really badly or really well edited?
Yeah.
Any bad edits in the room?
Want to share?
Ever felt abused in the process? Anybody want to share their secret bad stories? Names will not be disclosed. No?
No?
I just had like, they would move things around in a story and it would end up that the story would misquote someone. It would say someone said something when someone else said something, and I would never know how that happened because I didn't know the process.
How did you talk to your editor about it? How'd that?
Yeah, I would email them, and then the next time she edited my story, she checked with me, I guess.
She did.
Yeah, it was just like a one-time oversight, but it was frustrating because then my source was mad that they misquoted.
Are a lot of you here editors at your college papers, right? So you actually, I would guess, have the power to build into the process these sorts of checks and balances, right? Or at least suggest that you do something like that. It's really useful, and it gets you used to working in the rhythm that you would once you go to a real live professional newsroom.
Yeah.
It's good habits.
Yeah.
I would say one of the issues that we probably all face because we're all within like 4 years of each other is sometimes a tension when editors are in the same year, or if an editor is even, or like if the writer's older than the editor, and the editor is the one who has to make changes, and especially if it's like a veteran reporter doing a marquee story their senior year, and you have a younger person who has to edit them. I don't know if you still face those issues when so any thoughts on dealing like with an age difference or an experience gap where the editor is the younger one or less experienced one?
May I see it? So first of all, my first job, when I started out, they didn't have a copy desk. I built the copy desk from scratch. This is a professional newsroom in San Francisco. I was 23 at the time. And every single person I hired for that copy desk was older than me. I think the biggest age range was 10 years. And so I was not just, I was editing side by side with them, but I was also responsible for them. I was training them, I was managing them. Obviously and I was 25 when I got to the Washington Post, I was 28 when I got to the New York Times, so inevitably I'm working with reporters who are much older than me all the time, and editors. One is, be humble, show respect, understand that you're not going to be the young hotshot who comes in the room and knows much more than all these people, Yeah.
A line from Harvey.
Harvey?
Yeah, the one about being very, very smart or very, very nice.
Oh gosh, who remembers that? Brent? No, damn, I can't remember.
Okay, well, there's a line that says basically
something about being pleasant.
You can be very, very smart or very, very pleasant. I have been smart. I recommend pleasant.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah. Exactly. Great movie with James Stewart, for those who haven't seen it. So yeah, showing respect, always being professional. At the book review, we tend to be very formal in our correspondence with writers. A lot of the editing, most of the editing is done via email. So that adds a whole other element, because you're not just on the phone or in person talking to someone and they can read your body language or read your tone of voice. You have to be very careful about how you're crafting this memo to them about their work, essentially, kind of like, I did on Betsy's first edit. So there's ways to build in just sort of, it's having a good bedside manner, and also knowing your stuff. And as I think I said before, just sort of when you need to suggest a change, whether it's something minor or major, you need to have the evidence to back it up. You know, you should be specific as possible so that they can get where you're coming from. It's not just because it sounds better to me. Like, that doesn't work. And you know, it can totally be intimidating working with some people. I mean, for me, going to the Times, especially being at the book review when I started, I mean, I'm working with authors who I've been worshiping for years, you know, and suddenly I get so excited I get to work with these people. They're talking to me. I can't believe they're talking to me, you know. And so there's a little bit of an intimidation factor in there at first. And then, you know, I've kind of gotten over it. I still get intimidated when I meet them in person. It's like this whole idol thing, you know. But so, I mean, but obviously there's also respect built in with that. And I don't want them to be mad at me, you know. But I will be firm. And you'll be surprised sometimes. You'll expect someone's copy to come back a certain way because they have such and such a reputation, and then you go, oh, well, this person isn't perfect either, you know. But yeah, you realize that you have something to add to that story, and it's a collaboration. That's the main thing. I mean, you're on the same team. You both want the thing to be as good as it can possibly be. So if you can get across to the people you're working with that is the case, that you're on their side, that's also very valuable.
I would be, well, I have a question, then I have an answer. So where are the problems cropping up in your newsroom? Is it with the reporters being sensitive to being edited by a peer or someone younger, or is it with the editor? Where's the line there?
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it's been a pervasive issue with us, but every now and then I think, particularly like in our magazine, where especially like if you're a senior, you know, you sort of maxed out your time in the paper, so you come back and you write your big, you know, cover story, and just by nature, the editor is a sophomore or a junior, and you really have this whole vision for the story, and it just sort of feels like somebody's like infringing, you know, on your work, and you already served your term as editor, so of course you know what you're doing, but now somebody else is in the editor's done. I think it may just be that we all sort of pass through editorial roles, and then when those terms are over, you're back in the reporter seat, and somebody new and somebody who's not as old as you is like has stepped into that editor job.
Okay. So, two things, maybe three. Thing one is, I think there is a problem with the notion that to be a reporter in this process or in the newsroom is to be in a junior role.
Right.
And some papers, college and professional, just don't handle that well. I mean, a lot of the time to get more money or more authority or more autonomy, you have to be an editor. And so there's this built-in notion that it is a more responsible or respect-worthy role. But what they are two very different jobs, both of which I think are absolutely necessary, and I think people need to go into both of them with the idea that the newsroom should be a flat structure. With that said, when I was at ESPN, I was working with a senior coordinating producer who had massive, I mean amazing temper tantrums, threw chairs across production suites, which are full of really expensive equipment, and just blazing temper. And he was brilliant. I mean, he was a really insanely talented guy. We were all very lucky to learn from him, except for this thing. And he and I got just into it one day in his office. And he was a scary, intimidating guy, and he had this strong opinion about how we were going to go with one of the shows I was working on, and I disagreed. And I had learned some things from the time between when I was a baby reporter and then, and I expressed my disagreement politely and, you know, bullet-pointed list of problems I had with his notion for the show. And his response was, well, you're wrong, and here's why. And he had his own much louder bullet-pointed list. And he said, do you see? And I said, well, I see your points. I don't agree with them. And he couldn't live with that answer. And at one point in the conversation, I said, look, I'm going to do what you say, but I don't agree with you. And he couldn't live with that. And I remember walking out of his office that day and just thinking, I'm going to apply this for the rest of my life, which is that if you're the person, often in newsrooms, if you're the editor who's running a story, and you have the whip hand, as my dad would call it, or like the big stick, you do not, in fact, you should not run over the people you're working with. You get final say. So you should be the quiet person in the conversation. You don't have to talk the most. They're trying to persuade you. And, you know, I really do believe that editing should be a collaborative process, but when you get, you know, down to brass tacks about anything in this process, you should be able to negotiate an agreement. But if you're the person who has the perceived power, which is everybody who's editing, it's just built in. You try to change that. But you should be shutting up and listening more. And you should be kinder than you have to be. And you should launch into your conversations or your relationships with your reporters by stating explicitly, up front, here's how I work. I'm going to read this like a reader would. I'm going to explain to you how it comes off to someone who's just approaching it with new eyes. And then we can have conversations. You can use me as a sounding board to make your story better, because that is my only goal. I have no ego. My name's not on it. This is your work. I'm going to help you make it great for our publication. We're working together.
And as a reporter, if your editor hasn't come to you with that information, you are also allowed to go to them and say, here's how I like to work. How do you like to work? And, you know, make those processes align if possible. I would add one or two more things to this just exchange, which is the younger editor at your paper working with the more experienced person who's gone back and has reported the story. I mean, that person has something to learn from the writer too. So, I mean, perhaps they still need to learn that. Also, and I can't, you know, tell you. Are you the reporter in this situation? It hasn't happened. Oh, you're just saying you've observed this happen. I mean, yeah. I mean, it just all comes back to collaboration. There was one other thing I want to say. As an editor, if you find as editors yourselves in that situation, the sort of choosing which battles you're going to fight in copy is also an important thing. At the end of the day, it's the reporter's name, it's the reporter's byline on the piece. And I've had exchanges with reporters where I did just think, you know, well, this sentence is overwritten. You know, it's too purple. It's, you know, I make a suggestion for maybe cutting it back a little bit. But the writer is very attached to his or her prose. And you can argue about that kind of thing occasionally, and or at least not argue, but, you know, make suggestions back and forth. At a certain point, though, clock's ticking, you have to just kind of back away and be okay with it. You know, it's like, all right, this is their story. As long as it doesn't have factual errors in it or violate your house style, you know, it's their piece, and you've done your best, and you move on.
Speaking of.
Yes.
Okay. So shall I lead off with the... Have you done any assigning editor work?
Assigning editor work? I have done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's hit this part. So... Oh, I'm sorry.
I just have a follow-up kind of on that. What about in positions where it's not the first editor reading the story, it's kind of like a senior editor about to move it into the the last edited draft before it's printed? And then things are changed that maybe slip through, or the editor might be over editing. In this case, I'm the editor. This has happened. I've over edited pieces. And how do you deal with that after the fact in explaining why you made the edits and why they were not what the first editor said? Because I think sometimes as the reporter, it can be really confusing when one editor says something and the next editor up says, well, I didn't like the lead, so I rewrote it.
Well, that's a breakdown in process, one. And it's as you said, it's over editing. You shouldn't rewrite a lead without the reporter's sign off. Period, I would say.
Yeah, Jill Abramson shouldn't do that.
Yeah,
Nobody should
Jill
do
Abramson
that.
wouldn't do that. I mean, we have a whole desk at the Times called the news desk that is responsible sheerly for A1 stories. And anytime a story goes on A1, it's already been through 3 or 4 editors on the news desk. You've got the assigning editor doing an edit. You have the first copy editor. You have the copy chief. You might have one other editor involved. If it lands on A1, it's like a blessing and a curse because, one, the reporter's really excited it's on A1. Then they realize, oh my God, so much more attention is going to be paid to it. We're going to have at least one more editor, probably more, weighing in with their ideas of how the story should look. But at no part of that process does any change get made that is not run by the reporter first before it goes to print or
What about if you're doing it, though, like in late night production, just because the platform we're doing it on is college newspaper, it's 3 a.m.,
Right.
the reporter's probably not awake.
Do yourself
You
a
wake 'em
favor
up
and
anyway?
Try.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if worst comes to worst and the reporter is not picking up or doesn't respond to the text or is just like wakes up and is super pissed, what you're doing is actually demonstrating your respect. So, and if they don't pick up and the next day you owe them an apology, which I cannot say enough for if you owe somebody an apology, apologize. If you owe them an apology, you at least have the opportunity to say, I understood this was a big change. I really wanted to talk to you about it. I decided to go with it. Don't rewrite leads, but if you changed something and you made a mistake, which happens to everybody, apologize and then walk them through your process of trying to do it right and ask them how you could have done it better. Let them, that's the fastest way to diffuse something and to improve at the same time.
I would also add, at your papers, you might want to tell reporters that if they know they have a story going into production that night, just warn them. Say, you might get a phone call. Have your phone near you, one. If you're going out to dinner, you're going to a show, whatever you're doing, studying, closing yourself in the library, have your phone near you because I might need to get in touch with you. I might need you to be checking email. Production lasts till 3 a.m. or whatever it is. I apologize in advance if I have to call you. I will not abuse that privilege, but I will call you if there are problems because I want you to be involved. I don't want there to be any surprises. And I think the reporters really appreciate that. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
Sort of going along with that. So in the case of, I was sports editor last year of our paper, and there's a lot of times when the sports writers may not be as familiar with the sports, as you wish they would in terms of how the sport works or something like that. And a lot of times you have to, the way they write it doesn't account for, how you score a tennis match or something like that, I don't know. So how do you think, how much of a role should the editor have in fixing stuff that just, doesn't make sense the way it should be, versus, taking the time to then talk to the person and have him, write the exact same thing?
So this is a perfect opportunity for side-by-side editing. So if you've got somebody who's got knowledge gaps on something they're going to regularly cover, sit down with them during the editing process because you're going to have to change it and you're the person who understands it, but they should be there so they aren't repeating the same. You don't want to get stuck in that cycle. That sucks. And you also don't want to be, particularly with sports, there are a lot of errors that get introduced at the editing level in sports and in cops. And it's just lucky that people who follow sports don't sue as much as people who follow cops. But yeah, so you need them there to be your factual backstop, and they need you to be the person who can teach them how to write this. Mm-hmm. I would just say, and if you know you've got somebody who's not super solid, make them turn their copy in early. Mm-hmm. I know there's tight lines between I don't know what your production schedule is, but as much time as you can steal between when the match or game ends and, when you have to go to press, I would build as much in as you can.
Mm-hmm. And approach is key here too, because you don't want to be the guy who's like, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're writing about. Let me show you. I'm going to fix it. You want to be like, I've noticed that, this is a little confusing, or you may not have this all down. Let's pull up a chair. Here's me. Here's you. I'm going to do this. I'm going to explain as I go. And if you have any questions, chime in. So again, it's like, it's done together.
And you can also do the time-honored technique of saying, there are a couple things I didn't understand. And what you mean is, I didn't understand about your badly written copy because you didn't understand what was happening, but you can leave out the middle part. So there's a question in the back.
Yeah, it sort of goes along the same lines. I often find myself desperate for writers, so I'll work with someone who is frankly functionally illiterate, and I don't necessarily know how to not come off as the bad guy in that interaction. because at that point you are sitting down with someone for hours at a time and reconstructing every sentence into something that makes sense in English?
So we get this a lot at community papers. Like, I'm just going to dive in on this because I'm hoping that your people are all literate. We get this a lot. To just a little mini story. My first job, I worked with a woman who wrote a story about a bunch of tourism board people coming out to visit our part of the North Carolina mountains, and she wrote that they were treated to all the enmities of the gorge area, and she meant amenities, but it sounded like we were like all shivs out. So, and she'd been writing for, I'm not kidding you guys, 30, 40 years. She was a professional who'd been paid since high school to write, and she still made regular errors like that. And that is just sometimes the breaks, and she was upside terrific reporter. And some people can only report well and they don't ever really get like the writing thing, and some people only write well and they don't really report well. So to answer your question, how to not come off as the bad guy. This is one of those things where people are just tender on this stuff. And they're tender because they know they are not where they want to be. If they thought they were just aces, they'd have a turtle shell on, but they don't. And that's why their feelings get hurt. So I think the wiser, kinder, and ultimately best thing is to address that elephant and say, hey, so we have some very particular style things in our copy, and also news writing is really its own particular art. And so, give them a little homework. They need to be, some of the problem is that they're not reading, they don't understand the conventions, and they want to write their, whatever it is that they decided in 6th grade was great writing. So you have to, just say, this is a really well-written article about this. I think you should read it. It'll give you a sense of kind of what we are looking for. And second, there's not a good answer other than putting the time in. You sit down with them and you can't teach them everything in a conversation. I have tried that and it fails. You need to give them, you have to prioritize what are the things that I'm spending the most time editing. And that's the lesson of the day. Here's the headline, kids. You cannot quote people on stuff they didn't actually say. Or, but you got to give them the one takeaway in each conversation, and it's a process. If you're going to use these people over and over again, which if you're not, don't even start because this is a headache. But if you're going to use them over and over again, you're bringing them along. And they will never be my personal hero, E.B. White, but they can get to functional copy. They can.
And if you're doing it on deadline, you don't have hours and hours to annotate and necessarily have the conversations. But what you can do is at least, again, it kind of comes in the tone. It's maybe you do have to rewrite it for this time. I mean, I've had times in my career where I've had to do that. You still send it back to them and point out, as Betsy says, sort of a couple key things. Maybe say, let's talk about this later. Again, if you're planning on using them again. It's so hard to do under the gun, even though on, say, a weekly section where it's just like, but if it's someone who is receptive to talking to, I mean, that makes a big difference. Some people won't be. That's something else that can be a problem, in which case, as Betsy said, I wouldn't go to those people again. When I was working on a weekly section where I was assigning, it was all freelance again. I had sort of the luxury of choosing who to work with. There were sort of they're the people who are beautiful writers, love being edited, all smiles, and it's, goes so smoothly. People who, were not the strongest writers, but still took edits. Easy to work with, fine. If they're not the strongest writers and they're assholes, it's not worth it. Yeah. It's just not.
Yeah. And no, that's it.
Right?
That's just solid advice
no
right
assholes.
There. Yeah. Okay. Any more questions, or can we hold the rest till the Q&A? We'll whip through this. I almost promise. Okay.
So editor-reporter relationship, starting at the top, this doesn't apply in every newsroom, and not every newsroom doesn't work like this, but I like, as an assigning editor, to be the reader, the listener, the therapist, the whatever. The editor is there to brainstorm with, the editor is there for the reporter to come to if there are questions in the middle of reporting or once reporting is done. The reporter is drowning in their reporting. They don't know which, they have 5, 6 different leads. They have 5, 6 different themes. They don't really know what the story is about. That's when you want to be there to have that conversation. I know not all editors do this, but it will save the editor and the reporter a lot of tears later and time and effort. If you answer some of these questions from the beginning, so expectations are clear, and the reporter knows that you are there for them, as you're going through the process. I'm amazed when I meet reporters who supposedly have editors, but they're never available for a conversation. It's just part of it.
Yeah.
And the reporter.
Just to share with you guys something funny that just happened. I asked an assigning editor for the New York Times if she's ever been an assigning editor. So I'm going to pass out handouts from the reporter side. So from my perspective, coming from a reporting background and also just thinking about these things in nascent terms, my favorite reporters are actually total pains in the ass. They show up when they have the germ of a kernel of a not even an idea yet. They have a subject or like a source, and they don't have a story. And if you're going to be a reporter, I encourage you to be this kind of reporter, because even though it's a lot of work, you actually get the best stories out of this relationship. But they show up and they say, hey, I heard about this company that's maybe thinking about moving to Research Triangle Park, and it's something with tobacco leaf, virus, I don't know, development. This is an honest-to-God conversation. And I said, okay, what else do you have? And she said, and I said, okay, well, let's talk. How are you going to develop this story? And a lot of the time, it's the questioner role in the beginning. Like, you can come in and tell them what story you want, but as a reporter, I appreciated editors who would help me spin the story out of, like Jen did with E.B. White, help me spin the story out of what I already knew but didn't know I know, and know I knew. And as an editor, I like reporters who are maybe a little, not set on a direction. They don't show up with a thing and say every story is going to look like this, because that turns into a factor, and you want to surprise your readers. So before the story is written, you want to be in a brainstorming role, and that's questions, constant questions. And if you're the helpful person in the brainstorming situation, your suggestions all wait till the end. It's all questions, questions, questions. It sounds like you're saying, and then you rephrase what they've said. You're not throwing your own stuff in there. I'm hearing you say that this, or it sounds like you need more sources, or have you tried calling these guys? But it's not like, oh, well, that story's going to be blah, blah, blah.
Right. And I kind of jumped the gun and went over the, in progress. The reporter is inevitably going to want to check in. You're going to want to check in with your reporter if you know they're working on something. It's just the lines of communication should be constantly open. I feel like we've talked about, in a way, leads, now graphs, angles.
Does everybody
Do you all know what that is?
feel comfortable with those terms? I'm sorry, I know some of you are not journalism guys, some of you are coming in new, some of you said last night at dinner that you didn't get a ton of training. Is all this jargon comfortable? Anybody need things explained? No shame.
Okay,
I didn't know what a nut graph was when I started. Okay. Also, that is the correct way to spell leads. Don't let anybody tell you differently. Okay, and then, so your reporter has kept the lines of communication open. You've checked in with her if you can spare the time from your busy editor schedule. And nothing massive has changed since the idea was conceived. And so she turns in finished copy.
Mm-hmm. At which point, the editor gets to work, of course. there are a lot of different things that you're looking for as an editor, whether you're the assigning editor or the copy editor. How many of you had a chance to spend time on the microsite looking at the resources there? Do we know about the microsite? Yes? We posted something there called Finding the Holes, I think. Did you see that handout?
Highly recommended.
It is sort of an overview of, it gives the big picture stuff to be looking for when you're looking at the story, and then there's a section called Missing Details, which is the smaller stuff to have an eye out for when you're looking at the story. Mostly, I want to emphasize that when you're editing, you should never assume things. That is where a lot of errors are inserted into copy. I have a story. So when I was an intern, my only internship was an editing internship called the Dow Jones News Fund. Do you guys know about this? Who doesn't know about this one? Anyway, great editing internship. If you want to go into editing, if you're a strong copy editor, if you love fiddling with the copy, I highly recommend you check it out because it's a great training ground. It's a great way to land an internship and get your foot in the door to publication. But so I did this. I was a Dow Jones intern. I had an internship at a smaller paper, and I was editing a business story, which I probably had no business editing because I didn't know anything about business, but it's my internship. They're throwing everything at me that they possibly can, which is great. I made the mistake of, in a reporter's lead, mistake number one, making a change because I thought that it was like a typo or something. There was some sort of business jargon used. I wish I could remember what it was now. But there was some sort of standard English, very close translation of that, where I thought, surely the reporter must have meant this. So I changed it, and I didn't ask the reporter. The story goes, and my copy chief doesn't know. He's just looking and cleaning up my cleanups, and it shows up in the paper. However I changed it, it was wrong. It changed the meaning of the sentence. The reporter's getting angry phone calls. I'm getting angry phone calls. I mean, I'm amazed. I thought they were gonna, boot me out, but I had this great supervisor who, knew this was an internship, and the internships are where, in addition to your college papers, that's where you get to make your mistakes, right? So, I mean, huge, huge error on my part. I was distraught. I apologized profusely to the reporter. She hated me. That's fine. I was this little intern chick who messed up her copy. Fine. I was afraid of her in the newsroom for the rest of the summer. Fine. But at least I learned, right? I still, I'm traumatized by that whole experience. But I mean, that's just an example of, the smallest, what seems like the smallest thing could be a very big thing. So anytime you have questions in a story, note the question and go back to the reporter on it if you can, or go through, that reporter's editor, depending on where you are in the process and how it works at your paper. I know it's different at every paper. In terms of editing quickly, obviously it really helps for you to be extra familiar with your style manuals. How many of you have style manuals at your student papers?
AP,
and do you mostly follow
additional?
AP, or do you have house style, or both, some combination? So you don't need to have the style manual memorized. It's kind of impossible, but you need to know what's in it so you know what to look up. And you should always look up. Again, you don't assume either, about whether to capitalize something or not. Like if you're not 100% sure, you need to go back and actually look it up. It's part of what your job is, or if you're the copy editor especially. The higher level editor isn't necessarily making those changes, but it's nice when they're familiar with those things too.
So I would also, shall I leap in?
Leap in.
All right.
Leap in.
I would also say, the story's finished, you've turned it in. Show of hands. How many of you, when you have been editing as a peer or as an editor, someone else's piece, do you read it through once and then start marking, or do you mark as you read through? Who marks as they go through? Who reads through once? Gold star, kids. Okay. So I work in newsrooms where we're slinging like 14, 16 stories in about a 3-hour period, which is a stupid amount of work. Like not just crazy, but also dangerous. But that's the resource level. And the fact is, we really don't have a lot of time to read through every story once and give it like the cherishing, furnishing love that it deserves. But that's the best practice. And you ought to do that with every story. If you are pressed for resources, I highly recommend that you definitely do that for complex stories or stories from people who like to write complex, because I cannot tell you how many times in my career as I have been speeding through, fixing as I go, like noting questions in the margin about blah, blah, blah thing that get answered further down, but I'm like about to move copy around because I don't understand their structure. If I had just read through once, it would have saved me so much grief. And such a sense of, like, you read and steam starts coming off you because you're like, this idiot reporter never asked the right questions, and oh my God, I hate them, and oh, I'm calling her at 3 a.m. I'm going to be in bed at 2 and set my alarm. And, like, just, you get angry. But you should always, like, give the copy that respect if you can, and it will save you time, ultimately.
From the reporting side, I want to ask a question. When you file a story as reporters, how many of you are done versus how, okay, so rephrase. How many of you take the time after you've filed to your editor to read it through again?
Or before you've filed and after you've typed
Or
the last
both,
period.
yes. Okay, and how many of you file it and figure you're done and walk away? Honesty. Come on, it's got to be one or the other. No? How many of you are reporters? Or is this all just editors? You don't?
We edit in person.
Yeah. Oh, you edit in person. Okay. So just another best practice. For the reporters, you know, you're responsible for everything on that page. So I just think that when you file a story, you want to take the time to go back and read it while your editor is reading it, doing a final fact check, checking names, checking numbers, checking dates, checking math, checking all of that stuff, because that is really on you. And in the course of the editing process, you can then go to your editor and say, oh, I found this, and it's all happening at the same time. It's just a good habit to get into. Reporters at the Times do this, reporters at the Washington Post do this, or they should be, you know, they should all be doing this all the time. I mean, when I file a story, I'm reading it a zillion times because I'm looking for every little thing I might have missed. And you don't want to be the gnat reporter who's calling every 5 minutes for changes. You know, do it all at once, get it together, see which stuff your editor is maybe likely to catch on his or her own. Mostly, though, it's really important to be looking for those facts.
I would actually advise you to do it a little earlier in the process. I mean, keep doing it. Do it all night. Read your stories. But
if you're up against deadline.
If you're up against deadline, I still think if you are not doing a basic spell check and reading your leads, pull quotes, if you're being asked to write suggested heads and subheads, checking those. But like before you file, do yourself the great favor of just making sure it makes sense and spell check, for the love of God. It demonstrates that you respect your copy. And when I catch a really like obviously not spell check thing, it makes me think a little less of the reporter because he or she has not treated his or her copy with that respect.
Yeah, and it just looks lazy.
Yep. Okay, so.
Should we play a game?
Let's play a game. You guys want to play a game? Or do you want a Q&A?
Okay.
And by game, we mean quiz.
We can read this. Quiz! Quiz time!
Oh man, I meant to bring prizes.
Is that the next thing? Yeah, so I mentioned the Dow Jones News Fund editing internship.
Oh, wait, last night at dinner, I promised Katie, who has left, I promised somebody editing tests because they're having problems with quality control. They're all on that sheet I just handed out, but they're all the Dow Jones tests.
Yeah.
Which are best.
These are great. Just do them as practice tests, even if you're not applying for the internship. This is stuff that you should probably have memorized at some point in your life. Stuff that you need to know because you need to know when you see it that it's wrong, or that you need so that you know if you don't have it memorized, you got to go look it up again. This is sort of basic word usage. So I'm going to go down this list, and I don't know, how should we play this? How should we go?
Hands up.
Just
first
hands
and
up.
second.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first sentence. So the dealio is which one are we using? First sentence. Anyone?
First one. Okay, who thinks first one? Hands up. Who thinks second one? All right.
It's the first one. To loathe is to like hate, despise, dread. Loath to, another thing. Second one. Who thinks it's the reporter's whereabouts are a mystery? Who thinks it's the reporter's whereabouts is a mystery? You have really shy people in here.
No one's being graded, y'all. We're not giving out
two
jobs today.
fingers. Who is really sure and wants to give it a shot and explain why? Someone. Yes.
I think is just because if I'm changing whereabouts to location, I would say the reporter's location is a mystery.
Actually are. Flip the sentence. This is a good test for a lot of things. Flip the sentence. What if you say, what do you think? Am I wrong?
No, it's R.
Yeah, it's R.
But
Well,
if it were location, it
whereabouts-
would totally be is, but whereabouts are this is
Are-
actually
it's
just a
plural.
pure style book thing, not a
Yes.
grammar thing. So if you would encounter this sentence and you thought, this grammar is wrong, you would go look up whereabouts and it would tell you. So
Third sentence. Neither the reporters nor the photographer were happy with the assignment. Whose was? Were. It was. Neither nor is singular. Yes.
I thought you used the one which is closer to the reporter.
No, neither the reporters nor the. You take them.
If it were neither the photographer nor the reporters were happy with the assignment. You use whichever one is closer to it.
no, because you're talking about. Sorry, do you want to take
No,
this
go
or
for
should I?
it.
Okay, so when you're talking about neither, you're talking about individual. No matter if there's plurals within the individual groups, you're talking about two single groups. So you treat them.
You never say it was, like the reporters was happy.
I actually would say neither the photographer nor the reporter. Actually,
Neither the reporters nor the photographer were happy.
yeah, no, I would
Yeah,
say.
maybe you're right.
Oh, no, you're right. It was. Sorry, I was reading it. I misread it. Terrible editing. I was reading it as singular for both.
So yeah.
But the rule. Hang on. We're going to look
Wait.
this up because the rule is actually pretty important.
Also, I should say that the Dow Jones News Fund probably, I think they use AP style. So if you're going to study for the test, that's the style book you want to be using.
Another rule. Nothing worse than typing in public. All right, you guys can go on. Jen can give this quiz orally.
He is one of the few or only reporters to command the editor's respect. Who thinks few? Who thinks only? He is one of the few reporters to command the editor's respect, or he is one of the only reporters to command the editor's respect. Who thinks few? Who thinks only? Now this one, I had to look up earlier because one of the only is such a common idiomatic phrase, but actually the sticklers in the room want you to use few. Again, that's knowing whose style manual you're using. Yes, dear.
We have an answer to the rule. It's just much more complex than we thought. So it's about placement. You place your plural subjects last, and it takes the plural verb.
There you go. Yes.
Yes, it's bad sentence.
Bad sentence.
Bad Dow Jones.
So number 5. Publishers and editors seldom seem to agree with each other or one another on most topics. Who thinks each other? One another. Excellent. Because? Someone? Couldn't hear.
There's a lot of publishers and editors.
It's not just one-on-one.
person to the other.
Right, exactly. She is an editor who or whom I respect. These are so tricky. Okay, what did you say? Who thinks who?
I think they were booing.
Who thinks whom? Excellent. Yes, whom? Who wants to say why? Yeah. Right, right. And if a quick sub for this is if you say, do you say I respect her, or do I say I respect she? It's her, right? Who's the principal or principal figure? Principal AL, principal LE. First one? Second one?
Now, this is the part where I pull out my style book, but I'm pretty sure it's AL.
It's the first one.
Yeah.
A principal is a, yes, that's LE, yes. A principal is the first, or the main, or the whatever.
How much time do we have? Are we running out of Q&A time?
Yeah, I mean, we can keep doing this, go down the list, or we can ask, does anyone have burning questions they want to ask that we don't want to miss? Should we keep doing this for a little bit? This? Okay, let's do it quickly. He said an average of 10 people are or is laid off every year. Who thinks are? Who thinks is? It's are. The people are laid off, not the average, right? After the debate, after much debate, convinced or persuaded the editor to run the article. Who thinks convinced? Who thinks persuaded? It's persuaded. Okay. So, again, according to AP style, according to most style books, you persuade people to do something. You convince people of something.
Learning, we're
Ninjas. The editor poured
Oh God, y'all, please
poured
get this right.
over the report. There's a typo in the sentence, which we're not going to look at, but who thinks it's poured, the first poured? Who thinks it's the second poured? Okay.
This is the one thing I really hope you will take away today.
Yes. You pour over. You don't pour over. Who or whom should be assigned to do this article? Who thinks who? Very good. I'm not even going to, okay. She covered the city. Which council is it? First? Here's a tricky one. The publisher stood behind the lectern or podium when she addressed the staff. Who thinks it's the lectern?
I like that bullet of a hand.
Anyone think podium? Not after that. Okay, would you like to say why?
Podium is what you stand. This is a podium, that's a lectern.
Exactly.
You stand upon a podium or at a lectern.
Right. Should the reporter look farther or further? Excellent. The police said a couple computers or a couple of computers? AP style is a couple of. Most places it's a couple of, not a couple. The reporter laid the blame on her editor or lay the blame on her editor. Who thinks laid? Who thinks lay? Okay, I'm going to tell you that it's laid, and I want one of the laid people to tell me why. Yes?
Because laid is, it's like you lay it down, and then lay is the past tense of to lie, like when you yourself lie down.
Right. To lay is the present tense of laying an object down. It takes an object. Laid is the past tense of lay.
And lay is the past tense of lie.
That's correct. Look it up.
I looked this one up.
Most people look it up all the time. An editor must be disinterested, a disinterested participant or an uninterested participant in a discussion. Very good. The photo clearly showed a car colliding with or hitting the house. Good. Because? Okay. The person who or whom was named as a suspect had been mentioned in earlier articles. Right. All right. Biweekly or semi-weekly publication appears 26 times a year. It's bi. Yeah, bi is once every 2 weeks. Yeah? Okay.
All right.
Excellent job, everyone.
Nice work, team.
But, I mean, okay, so the point of doing this drill is that, this stuff comes up all the time in copy. If you don't know it, you should look it up. Look it up. Look it up. And on the microsite, there's also a whole resource of homophones. There's a link to this, I think, that we uploaded that has all these words that sound the same, but are spelled differently and mean different things, like the poured, tons of those. And it's just good to know which of those words you need to recognize as you're moving through copy.
Okay, so we have like a minute for questions.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think, weren't we
Were
supposed
we
to
done
end
at
half?
4:45 or 4:30?
Oh, we've got 15 and a half minutes. So what do you guys have? And also, when I talked to you guys this morning, I mentioned, before I forget, I mentioned something about cover letters. Please do not distribute these on the web or anywhere else. They're special for you. They are personal to me. These are 2 cover letters I've written recently, and the point of this exercise is not to say my cover letters are awesome, although they are. The point of the exercise is to show that there are 2 principles. One is your cover letter is your writing sample. It's the first one before they see your clips. So when you are applying for jobs, particularly in a creative field, your cover letter must not, for the love of God, be, "Dear so-and-so, I saw your job posted on journalismjobs.com. I would like it. Thank you. My cover letter is attached." And then a really boring cover letter attached. Like, write lively, write interesting, write vivid copy. So this is an example of things that you probably wouldn't see in a resume book, because resume books don't cover journalists. And they are for 2 very different jobs. One's for a magazine that has a very particular voice, and the other's for an editing gig. And they are, you'll see the difference of, at a newspaper, and you'll see the difference in tone. And one of these got me an interview, and the other one, the jury is still out, so we'll see.
Also, since we're talking about cover letters and resumes, please, 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 before you send your resume to anyone, check every detail. If you don't have a good eye for details, little details, have one of your friends who is check every detail for you. And especially the spelling of the name of the person you're sending the cover letter and resume to. Even, whether it's a casual email, whether it's this is so important. I got a totally unsolicited request recently from a student at a university who was wondering if I had needed a research assistant, and the person spelled my name wrong. It's not that hard, Jen McDonald, So it's just that immediately, there was this long memo about how wonderful this person was and all the stuff this person had done, and I was like, you're probably smarter than me, but you spelled my name wrong, and I'm not going to give you the time of day. I'm sorry. It's just lazy. So keep that in mind.
Also, if you don't, job tips, and then we really will get to your questions. Yeah. If you don't know who the hiring person is, because often it's not listed on ads, these are news jobs. You should call and ask. Like, that's basic reporting. And if you don't do that, they're not going to be insulted that you called and said, "To whom should I address this letter?" To whom? They're going to be insulted by a letter that says, "Dear to whom it may concern, editor, person." Like, just do the work. Show you're a journalist before you get the job as a journalist. Questions? Yeah.
Can you speak up a little so everyone can
Sorry.
hear you? Yeah.
One thing I've been told as a senior trying to go into journalism, people say, oh, the old-fashioned path, you start working at a small newspaper and sort of move up to the world after a few years. Doesn't work anymore because the small newspapers are hurting more than the big ones, and they don't have money to hire young people out of college. And the answer may be nowhere, but I was wondering where should young people going into journalism now be looking?
I hold strong views, but do you want to?
I would like you to begin.
Okay. I'll begin once again on the internet. With everybody knows about journalism jobs, right? Okay. If you don't, that's just bad reporting.
Do you? Good.
Okay, so this site is just look at the jobs that are posted for April 12th, which we're going to scroll through here.
Lots.
You can get a job in journalism. And if you're willing to, the other thing I would strongly recommend, okay, so you have to have skills, but you're kind of at an advantage right now because you are in a skill building environment. So you have a couple months of school left if you're a senior, but those of you who are sophomores, freshmen, juniors, start reading job postings now and see what people want, and then learn those things. You are in a position to do that, and if you don't, you are wasting some time. But yeah, these jobs are not, one other thing, someone at the Nieman Foundation very wisely told me a couple of weeks ago that women tend to, sorry, not to be sexist, but women tend to apply for jobs for which they are entirely qualified. Like they can tick off everything on the list. And men tend to apply for jobs for which they hold 60% of the qualifications. And that's actually, and men get those jobs. People are getting those jobs. And the men who do that are perceived as reaching and self-improving, and women have this like, oh, please forgive me for living. I don't actually know how to code every language. But I know 15, is that good enough? You know, it's like that. So I would say, one, don't be intimidated by job listings. Emphasize your strengths, emphasize your ability to learn, get a couple of really stellar letters of reference and attach them to your cover letter and resume, and then make sure those people are available to say lovely things about you. But no, I mean...
Strong clips, too.
Yeah, strong clips. And if you don't have... I mean, you're all at student newspapers, so I'm assuming you have clips. But if you don't, call your local paper and say, I would like to do a little stringing for you. I need some clips. I'm applying for journalism jobs. They will take you. I would take you. And I'm picky as hell. So there. That.
Are you hoping to be a reporter? Yeah. Of a certain type?
Metro News.
Metro News, okay.
There are good gigs out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think you would find, like, among the Nieman Fellows, we have this thing that we do where we all describe how we got to where we are now and why. We do one of these a week. And the thing that's been fascinating all year is that there is zero consistency among the stories. Nobody has done this in a traditional way. I thought I was going to teach medieval studies when I grew up.
And I was going to be a professional ballet dancer. For real. I know I don't look like it now.
But yeah, so there's, I mean, people come by. Alex, who talked to you earlier, went to art school. Alex, who talked to you earlier, went to art school first. I mean, there's just, you can do this. It's storytelling. You can do this. Next. That was just a really good stretch. Gotta have a question now. Come on.
I had a question that I was saving for later. It's not job related. So.
It's okay. We'll take it. It's open to anything now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering about reporter-editor interactions. Not so much on the actual physical editing end, but during the reporting process. One challenge that we've had is sometimes reporters tend to do exactly what we instruct them and not a little and not anything more, which it's like it's like frustrating because there's no way to like tell them, oh, do, like, because you know explicitly we're not giving them instructions, but like there's sometimes intangibles that I feel like they're not doing, and I was wondering like,
can you give me
a specific example?
Yeah, do you have an example? We won't repeat your story.
Yeah, no, I mean the story actually came out well. We did a story a little while ago on an unpublished sexual assault survey that the university had conducted, and it came out well. But the reporter was kind of, you know, the whole time we had to be, okay, now talk to this person, now talk to this person, like, and I thought it could have benefited from, you know, spending an hour on the internet reading about sexual assault policy, which, you know, she just, you know, didn't do because it's not something that we explicitly told her. So.
I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
How long has she been writing for the paper? What year is she?
She's a junior. She's been writing since her freshman fall.
And I mean, is this a pretty normal interaction for you guys? Or was she just fluffing this assignment?
I think the difficulty is it was a longer term assignment than what she's used to, and you know, especially, you know, reporters who are used to more daily news, getting them kind of the mindset of, you know, you need to take time with this, and there are multiple steps, and you know, this isn't going to be done in a day or a week or even maybe a month. Yeah. But and getting them to be self-starting in those types of situations are difficult.
I think we're going to do what my dad and mom call a hot wash, which is you look at everything you did wrong and then you don't do it again. Do you have?
Go for it.
Okay. So I would say this is one of those things on the front end where it would really have maybe benefited from, I suspect you did some brainstorming meetings, but it was kind of a top-down idea. Did she come to you with this concept, or did you?
No, we attended her.
Okay. So this is part of the having a story assigned dynamic, unless the person buys in and gets a voice early in the process, I think these sorts of things have a higher than average rate of failure. Like, your reporter has to be, particularly for a project that requires sustained work, enthusiastic and to feel ownership. So, and you can do that in the brainstorming process where you say, we have this idea, really need your skills on this, really need a reporter who can approach it the way you did on X, Y, and Z story. How would you do this? Can we like pull this together? And then in that process, you know, part of you don't want to have to make it explicit what every step is, but you really ought to make expectations clear. And this is just a management thing. People will fail if they don't know what the expectations are because they are not, you know, all telepaths. So if you say the expectation is that this is going to be a piece that comes from multiple angles, we're going to talk about field research. We're going to talk to people who have firsthand anecdotal experience. We're going to deal with the administration. Like, this is the scope of this project. Are you on board? And how are you going to, what's your plan and how can we help? Slightly better chance of success. And on a long-term project, you got to check in constantly. And if the reporting isn't there when you need the story, hold the story. Like, run a bunch of Q&As or whatever. But, you know, it's better than running a half-assed story about something really important that's you spent time on.
What's your plan is a great stock question to have in your pocket to draw her out. Yeah.
In the same vein as that of running really good stories, something that I've always come up against when it comes to writers, especially newer writers, if you give them a larger assignment where they have to talk to administrators or even government people, they kind of stop. Like, after like 1, 2, 3 sources, they don't really look for people who disagree. They don't really look for like objection or at least like another opinion. So for student writers who don't get paid to do this, who are doing it probably for a couple of clips and are also students first, kind of how could we incentivize people to find and write great stories that even if they're not like objective, they're at least holistic and not like stilted and one-sided?
Well, having a response to a statement made by one person, if it's some sort of issue where you really do need someone to respond, is kind of basic reporting 101 of fairness, right? And so if a reporter turns in copy, that's one of the big holes, you know, and you point it out to them then, and you say, you know, we really need comment from so-and-so or this type of person from this type of place, because at the moment we're only getting this side of the story. And I mean, you should be able to address that pretty quickly. I mean, in terms of the person being a student and that being their first priority and having all this stuff they have to juggle, I mean, there's also the question of expectations when they first sign up for the story, and the conversation you have to have about how, you know, once you take this on, I'm going to be working with you closely. I need you to be available to me, to us, to the paper, to the story, you know, and have your reasons why in those instances. Yeah.
I think it goes back to, in that brainstorming process, your job is to kind of be the questioner, you know, so you're drawing out this person, and same with your situation. I mean, your job is, what should go into this story? And you can, I mean, it's pretty Socratic. What should go into this story, do you think? Let's make sure all the pieces are there in your plan before you even pick up the phone. It also very much depends on the story. Like, let me give you the concrete strategy answer too. Concrete strategy, when you have an overworked reporter who's doing a complex story on an issue on which there are 2 pretty entrenched sides, is to assign 2 reporters. And to say, reporter A, could you take the, you know, positive, and reporter B, can you take the negative or dispositive or whatever? You know, and can you guys do a double byline story? The other thing is, I think, depending on the, you know, we talk a lot about fairness in news stories, and we get criticized a lot for having he said, she said stories.
Which is not the same thing.
I know,
right.
And I agree. Yeah. But I think on issue stories, and you see this in the Atlantic, you don't have to have both sides on an issue story necessarily. Your story could be what this group of people is saying about this issue. The place where it becomes absolutely, and then what you need is to be well-grounded in the research around it. So if they're saying something insane, like just crazy cakes, and you need them to, you need to acknowledge the research, that's fine, but they don't have to do like extra super layers of digging. And that's a follow-up story. They get a second clip. But if it's a piece where someone's being attacked or where there's a major, policy issue at stake or there's immediate action coming, then yeah, you need all voices. But I think if you have reporters who are struggling with this and who are in a time crunch, it's good to think about like what the stakes are for the story. If you're asking about abortion, we know what both sides say. So maybe you have an angle where it's just like what this group is doing, and you don't have to call whoever else. Anyway. Others?
Sometimes at schools where there's only so many things that are happening, it may be hard to figure out topics for news stories sometimes. Because it seems like it's just, is this application that had this many people apply to it kind of a thing, but what else has been going on? How do you suggest going about figuring out and thinking of those good stories to include?
So glad you asked. So this is a small town problem too, but you guys have an edge on this, which is in small towns you have to go to the grocery store and listen to people whining in the aisles, but or go to, God forbid, city council meetings. But on university campuses, what you have are a bunch of people who are publishing. So you're not going to be covering the student body. What you're going to be doing is talking about the graduate students. And this is a layer of reporting that doesn't get into a ton of college newspapers because they're powered by undergrads and you guys have your own particular view. I would encourage you to expand your lens because there is so much happening at the graduate level and among the professoriate. Anybody who's up for tenure, first of all, it would be great to see more stories about the tenure review process because that is, you talk about high drama, like who's publishing, who's getting tenure, who's getting dismissed. That's like big deal news. It's not super visible to undergrads, but if you go to the departments and they're talking about who's up for tenure review, they will tell you. And then you can go talk to people about the process. Or if you ask people what their publication is, that's like what their new publishing is. What do you have in the journal Science coming out next month? Can we, get that from you? Because it's pretty cool stuff and it's local because it's happening on your campus, even though it might be a global issue. It's being done locally, and I would mind that, man. That's great stuff.
And I think we have to wrap it up with that.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much.